Wunmi, what are you carrying since morning that you haven't brought in? You've been on this for 1 hour now. You are too lazy. When will you now start arranging the goods in the pantry if you are still struggling with bringing them upstairs for the past 1 hour? Don't let me change it for you, Mrs. Oloro screamed. I will soon be through, ma, said the housemaid, who had been saddled with bringing in Mrs. Oloro's latest collection of kitchen utensils, which she sold from home. The task has become too hectic for Wunmi, who didn't find it this hard when her boss lived in the flat below. Yes, they used to live in the flat below until suddenly Mrs. Oloro decided to relocate upstairs after two of the flat owners occupying the flat upstairs left. Her co-downstairs tenant, Mrs. Shubomi, had sought the caretaker's approval to relocate upstairs due to the serenity in the place, which she needed many times as a content creator. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Oloro too had decided to contact the caretaker to tell him she wanted the space upstairs. The caretaker told her someone already showed interest and would pay the next day. Ms. Oloro insisted by bribing her way through into the caretaker's heart. This development was strange to Wunmi because she didn't see any sense in what her boss just did. Her boss sells kitchen utensils from home, and almost every week, supplies get delivered to her home. It was easy to move the goods in when they were staying downstairs. Wunmi would move in the items within 30 minutes, humming to a inward melody to sustain her interest. But now, reverse is the case, as she frowned all through the offloading process. To make matters worse, her boss was shouting at her, refusing to understand that the working condition was more tedious than before. "Is it me you are frowning at?" asked Mrs. Oloro, who noticed Wunmi was frowning at her for the first time in a long time. "I am sorry, ma. It's just that." "It's just what?" Mrs. Oloro replied. "Go into the pantry and arrange those goods for me. And don't forget to serve me my food. I am hungry." Wunmi walked into the pantry, soliloquizing to herself that offloading goods wasn't part of her job specifications when she started. But what could she do? Mrs. Oloro, a fair, plump divorcee, fairly comfortable, likes to stretch her spending beyond her capacity. Looks like she's always trying to prove a point to people that she's successful too. She is a very attractive and fashionable woman, yet she gets envious of this calm, tall, and slim female neighbor of ours, Mrs. Shubomi. Mrs. Shubomi was happily married with a teenage boy as her only child. She works in one of the top companies of that city, and her dressing every morning was always formal and exquisite. She had suits in different colors. Her teenage son was very handsome, and their movement outside their flat every morning into the car was always attention-grabbing because of the attractiveness they exude. Mrs. Oloro would stand behind her living room window side to peep at them every morning when they were leaving for work. At first, it started with admiration. She has bought herself some colorful suits, just like Mrs. Shubomi, only to find out that she couldn't wear them most times because she sold goods from home and it didn't make sense wearing suits at home. If only she had thought it through before she wasted her money. She also had a toddler whose touring had become more intense due to the staircase. One day, Mrs. Shubomi was receiving a call beside her car downstairs. Mrs. Oloro was standing on her balcony upstairs watching her. Just then, a lady came into the compound to deliver a basket of cooked litres of soup for Mrs. Shubomi. She was done with her call and received her package from the lady, who smiled so much at her and asked about her son. The exchange of greetings between them seemed so cordial. One would think they were friends. "Mrs. Shubomi, gave the lady some money before she left. She turned to go in the direction of her flat when she looked up and saw her neighbor staring at her. She hailed a greeting at Mrs. Oloro, who answered through her nose. She went upstairs. The next morning, Wunmi, the maid, had served her boss, Mrs. Oloro, a plate of pepper soup and plantain. Junior, her son, was eating his plate of noodles with cereals in a plate beside him. Just after taking the first sip, Mrs. Oloro spat out the pepper soup. "What is this?" she screamed. Wunmi ran into the living room. "Why is it so bitter?" she shouted. Wunmi, looking confused. "What is it, ma? I tasted it before I served you, and it was okay." Wunmi explained. "Oh, you now eat my food without my permission. You are gone from this house," she screamed. Wunmi went on her knees to beg. "Please, ma, I won't do that again. I will cook another one. Please, ma." She held Mrs. Oloro's cloth as she apologized. Mrs. Oloro jacked her hands off. "Pack your things and leave my house. I have had enough from you," she said, and angrily pulled her son up from the chair and made for the door. "By the time I am back, I don't want to see you." She went out with her son, while Wunmi continued sobbing. 2 hours later, Mrs. Oloro came back to her house, and like she commanded, Wunmi had left. She felt pleased. She felt hunger pangs. So she decided to go on Instagram to look for a chef. After minutes of scrolling, she found one. She ordered for liters of different soups and gave them her address. She sat before the TV and munched on some snacks on a table before her. She dozed off. Few hours later, a knock on the door woke her. She went to the door and saw that a delivery guy had brought the food. She wasn't pleased with that. She picked her phone and made a call to the chef she had ordered from. "Hello, why did you send my food to a rider? What if he had poisoned it or eaten out of it? Why couldn't you send one of your girls?" "No, I don't like this," she complained bitterly. The voice on the other end of the phone apologized to her. She took the liters of food to the kitchen and turned them into pots. She served herself from the food. She spat out the food after the first spoonful. "Why so peppery?" she screamed at no one in particular. Hesitant, she summoned courage again and took the second spoonful. This time, she flung the plate of food into the living room. She went to the kitchen and tasted from other buckets of food. She realized she encountered the same problem. She sat down and started crying. "And to think I spent 100,000 buying this trash." She picked her phone to call the vendor. The phone was picked and she started screaming at the vendor. "What poison did you cook there? What business have you in the culinary space? You made me waste my money." The phone was cut off from the other end. "What?" She cut the call. "I will call her out on social media. She thinks she is smart." Just when she wanted to make the call, two customers had screamed her name from downstairs, screaming at her to come and attend to them, and they had been shouting her name since morning. She apologized and screamed, "Wunmi!" It suddenly dawned on her that she had sent her away. Angry, she went to the store to pack their order and with difficulty moved the goods downstairs to her customers who were still fuming. "Why did you move upstairs? Do you think I will be climbing stairs to meet you when you are not the only one selling kitchen utensils?" Mrs. Oloro apologized. When she tried to return upstairs, she saw a group of young and really attractive cleaning agency cleaning Mrs. Shubomi's house. They had just finished cleaning her apartment. Mrs. Shubomi wasn't around as it was office hours, but she had used them consistently for 5 years and had trusted them enough to clean her house in her absence. Mrs. Oloro had once entered Mrs. Shubomi's flat. She had marveled at how sparkling clean the house was. "So this is the secret. That woman is too lazy. Does she do anything with her hands at all?" Then she rushed to meet the cleaners as they were leaving. "Excuse me, Come and clean my apartment. I will pay. The cleaners greeted her and told her it didn't work that way. She has to call their head office and book an appointment. Then they will tell her which day to come. After she insisted she wanted it that minute, they told her she would have to pay an extra for the rush. She agreed, and boom, they got to work. She went about with them as they walked in various angles of her apartment, smiling sheepishly that she was using the same cleaners her neighbor used. The cleaning lasted for 3 hours. She had cooked for them and slept off. Suddenly, her phone rang. She picked. So, you now forget my daughter in school, right? I'm going to file for custody for my child. This nonsense has gone on for way too long. He cut the call. That was a call from her ex-husband. Anxious, she rushed out of her house to mend the situation. On getting home, she pacified her 5 years old son and gave him food to eat. She went into her pantry to arrange some things, only to find out that some of her goods had been broken by the cleaners. They were goods worth about 250K. Agitated, she screamed. The loss was too much for her. She took her phone and attempted to call them. It then dawned on her that she didn't get their phone number. She sat on her chair, biting her lower lips and shaking her leg. Later in the evening, she made an attempt to report the matter to Mrs. Shubumi, whom she knew would have their phone numbers, but she couldn't bring herself to seek the help of someone she envied. 3 days later, it dawned on her that she was seriously broke. The amount she had splurged on buying food from outside was far beyond what she paid Wumi for her numerous services. In the past few weeks, she had outsourced cleaning, cooking, and offloading, services her former maid did on a 50K monthly salary. Her finances had greatly depleted and she was all alone. Her ex-husband was so financially useless, which was why she left him. One day, she was moving around the compound during work hours, thinking deeply. She had believed no one would come into the compound at that time. Suddenly, Mrs. Shubumi walked in. Mrs. Oloro didn't know when she came in, as she didn't hear the sound of a car. Mrs. Shubumi had taken a cab to pick something important at home. Her car was with her mechanic. She had seen Mrs. Oloro weeping in a corner of the compound. She went behind her and touched her softly. Mrs. Oloro was shocked. Whatever it is you are going through, I want you to know that you are strong, bold, and beautiful. Don't you ever forget that, she said and walked into her flat. Mrs. Oloro stared, internalizing what has happened. Slowly, she went into her flat to ruminate. Few weeks later, Mrs. Shubumi and Mrs. Oloro came out of Mrs. Oloro's flat, giggling. I need a home teacher for my son. I have been making enquiries and doing some research on it for the past 3 weeks, and I think I have gotten the best person to handle it, said Mrs. Shubumi. Mrs. Oloro looked surprised. Upon further prodding, she realized Mrs. Shubumi takes her time to select things and people for her services. She makes countless inquiries and research to get the best hand for the job. No wonder everything about her looked so exquisite, down to her interior and her clothing. They were uncommon. She researched the best for the services and plans her finances months before she finally executes them. Mrs. Oloro wondered what kind of woman she was. She told herself she needed to learn from her rather than envy her. She did, and her life turned out better.